Alright, guys, let's read one more chapter of The Fall by Albert Camus. How long is this one? Please don't tell me it's that long, that long, that long. Why do you want to write so long, bud? No, it's kind of long. A doll's village, isn't it? No shortage of quaintness here. But I didn't bring you to this island for quaintness, cher ami. Anyone can show you peasant headdresses, wooden shoes, and ornamented houses, with fishermen smoking choice tobacco surrounded by the smell of furniture wax. I am one of the few people, on the other hand, who can show you what really matters here. We are reaching the dike. We'll have to follow it to get as far as possible from these two charming houses. Please, let's sit down. Well, what do you think of it? Isn't it the most beautiful negative landscape? Just see on the left that pile of ashes they call a dune here, the grey dike on the right, the livid beach at our feet, and in front of us, the sea, the color of a weak lye solution with the vast sky, reflecting the colorless waters. A soggy hell indeed, everything horizontal, no relief. Space is colorless and life dead. Is it not universal obliteration, everlasting nothingness made visible? No human beings, above all, no human beings. You and I alone facing the planet at last deserted. The sky is alive? You are right, cher ami. It thickens, becomes concave, opens up air shafts and closes cloudy doors. Those are the doves. Haven't you noticed that the sky of Holland is filled with millions of doves, invisible because of their altitude, which flap their wings, rise or fall in unison, filling the heavenly space with dense multitudes of grayish feathers carried hither and thither by the wind? The doves wait up there all year round. They will above the earth look down and would like to come down, but there was nothing but the sea and the canals, roofs covered with shop signs, and never a head on which to light. You don't understand what I mean? I'll admit my fatigue. I lose the thread of what I'm saying. I've lost that lucidity to which my friends used to enjoy paying respects. I say my friends, moreover, as a convention. I have no more friends. I have nothing but accomplices. To make up for this, their number has increased. They are the whole human race. And within the human race, you first of all, you first of all, whoever is at hand is always the first. How do I know I have no friends? It's very easy. I discovered it the day I thought of killing myself to play a trick on them, to punish them in a way. But punish whom? Some would be surprised and no one would feel punished. I realized I had no friends. Besides, even if I had, I shouldn't be any better off. If I had been able to commit suicide and then see the reaction, why, then the game would have been worth the candle. But the earth is dark, cher ami, the coffin thick and the shroud opaque. The eyes of the soul, to be sure, if there was a soul and it has eyes. But you see, we're not sure. We can't be sure, otherwise there would be a solution. At least one could get oneself taken seriously. Men are never convinced of your reasons, of your sincerity, of the seriousness of your sufferings, except by your death. So long as you are alive, your case is doubtful. You have a right only to their skepticism. So if there were the least certainty that one could enjoy the show, it would be worth proving to them what they are unwilling to believe and thus amazing them. But you kill yourself, and what does it matter whether or not they believe you? You are not there to see their amazement and their contrition, fleeting at best, to witness, according to every man's dream, your own funeral. In order to seize being a doubtful case, one has to seize being, that's all. Besides, isn't it better thus? We'd suffer too much from their indifference. You'll pay for this, a daughter said to her father, who had prevented her from marrying a too well-groomed suitor, and she killed herself, but the father paid for nothing. He loved fly casting. 3 Sundays later he went back to the river to forget, as he said. He was right, he forgot. To tell the truth, the contrary would have been surprising. You think you are dying to punish your wife, and actually you are freeing her. It's better not to see that. Besides, the fact that you might hear the reasons they give for your action, as far as I am concerned, I can hear them now. He killed himself because he couldn't bear. Ah, cher ami, how poor in invention men are. They always think one commits suicide for a reason, but it's quite possible to commit suicide for 2 reasons. No, that never occurs to them. So what's the good of dying intentionally, of sacrificing yourself to the idea you want people to have of you? Once you are dead, they will take advantage of it to attribute idiotic or vulgar motives to your action. Martyrs, cher ami, must choose between being forgotten, mocked, or made use of. As for being understood, never. Besides, let's not beat about the bush. I love life. That's my real weakness. I love it so much that I am incapable of imagining what is not life. Such avidity has something plebeian about it, don't you think? Aristocracy cannot imagine itself without a little distance surrounding itself in its life. One dies if necessary, one breaks rather than bending, but I bend because I continue to love myself. For example, after all I have told you, what do you think I developed? An aversion for myself? Come, come, it was especially with others that I was fed up. To be sure, I knew my failings and regretted them, yet I continued to forget them with a rather meritorious obstinacy. The prosecution of others, on the contrary, went on constantly in my heart. Of course, does that shock you? Maybe you think it's not logical, but the question is not to remain logical. The question is to slip through, and above all, yes, above all, the question is to elude judgment. I'm not saying to avoid punishment, for punishment without judgment is bearable. It has a name besides that guarantees our innocence. It is called misfortune. No, on the contrary, it's a matter of dodging judgment, of avoiding being forever judged without ever having a sentence pronounced. But one can't dodge it so easily. Today we are always ready to judge as we are to fornicate, with this difference that there are no inadequacies to fear. If you doubt this, just listen to the table conversation during August in those summer hotels where our charitable fellow citizens take the boredom cure. If you still hesitate to conclude, read the writings of our great men of the moment, or else observe your own family and you will be edified. Mon cher ami, let's not give them any pretext, no matter how small, for judging us. Otherwise, we'll be left in shreds. We are forced to take the same precautions as the animal tamer. If, before going into the cage, he has the misfortune to cut himself while shaving, what a feast for the wild animals. I realized this all at once the moment I had the suspicion that maybe I wasn't so admirable. From then on, I became distrustful. Since I was bleeding slightly, there was no escape for me. They would devour me. My relations with my contemporaries were apparently the same and yet subtly out of tune. My friends hadn't changed. On occasion, they still extolled the harmony and scrutiny they found in my company. On occasion, they still extolled the harmony and security they found in my company, but I was aware only of the dissonances and disorder that filled me. I felt vulnerable and open to public accusation. In my eyes, my fellows ceased to be the respectful public to which I was accustomed. The circle of which I was the center broke, and they lined up in a row as on the judge's bench. In short, the moment I grasped that there was something to judge in me, I realized that there was in them an irresistible vocation for judgment. Yes, they were there as before, but they were laughing, or rather it seemed to me that everyone I encountered was looking at me with a hidden smile. I even had the impression at that time that people were tripping me up. 2 or 3 times, in fact, I stumbled as I entered public places. Once even I went sprawling on the floor. The courtesan Frenchman in me didn't take long to catch hold of himself and attribute those incidents to the only reasonable divinity, that is, chance. Nonetheless, my distrust remained. Once my attention was aroused, it was not hard for me to discover that I had enemies. In my profession to begin with, and also in my social life. Some among them I had obliged, others I should have obliged. All that, after all, was natural, and I discovered it without too much grief. It was harder and more painful, on the other hand, to admit that I had enemies among people I hardly knew or didn't know at all. I had always thought, with the ingenuousness I have already illustrated to you, that those who didn't know me couldn't resist liking me if they came to know me. Not at all. I encountered hostility, especially among those who knew me only at a distance without my knowing them myself. Doubtless they suspected me of living fully, given up completely to happiness, and that cannot be forgiven. The look of success, when it is worn in a certain way, would infuriate a jackass. Then again, my life was full of bursting, and for lack of time I used to refuse many advances. Then I would forget my refusals for the same reason, but those advances had been made me by people whose lives were not full, and who, for that very reason, would remember my refusals. Thus it is that in the end, to take but one example, women cost me dear. The time I used to devote to them I couldn't give to men who didn't always forgive me this. Is there any way out? Your successes and happiness are forgiven you only if you generously consent to share them. But to be happy, it is essential not to be too concerned with others. Consequently, there was no escape. Happy and judged, or absolved and wretched. As for me, the injustice was even greater. I was condemned for past successes. For a long time I had lived in the illusion of a general agreement, whereas from all sides judgments, arrows, mockeries rained upon me, inattentive and smiling. The day I was alerted I became lucid. I received all the wounds at the same time, and lost my strength all at once. The whole universe then began to laugh at me. That is what no man, except those who are not really alive, in other words, wise men, can endure. Spitefulness is the only possible ostentation. People hasten to judge in order not to be judged themselves. What do you expect? The idea that comes most naturally to man, as if from his very nature, is the idea of his innocence. From this point of view, we are all like that little Frenchman at Buchenwald who insisted on registering a complaint with the clerk, himself a prisoner who was recording his arrival. A complaint? The clerk and his comrades laughed. Useless old man, you don't lodge a complaint here. But you see, sir, said the little Frenchman, my case is exceptional. My case is exceptional. I am innocent. We are all exceptional cases. We all want to appeal against something. Each of us insists on being innocent at all costs, even if he has to accuse the whole human race and heaven itself. You won't delight a man by complimenting him on the efforts by which he has become intelligent or generous. On the other hand, he will beam if you admire his natural generosity. Inversely, if you tell a criminal that his crime is not due to his nature or his character, but to unfortunate circumstances, he will be extravagantly grateful to you. During the council's speech, this is the moment he will choose to weep. On the other hand, he will beam if you admire his natural generosity. Inversely, if you tell a criminal that his crime is not due to his nature or his character, but to unfortunate circumstances, he will extravagantly be grateful to you. He will be extravagantly grateful to you. During the council's speech, this is the moment he will choose to weep, yet there was no credit in being honest or intelligent by birth, just as one is surely no more responsible for being a criminal by nature than for being a criminal by circumstance. But those rascals want grace, that is irresponsibility, and they shamelessly allege the justifications of nature, the excuses of circumstances, even if they are contradictory. The essential thing is that they should be innocent, that their virtues by grace of birth should not be questioned, and that their misdeeds born of a momentary misfortune should never be more than provisional. As I told you, it's a matter of dodging judgment. Since it is hard to dodge it, tricky to get one's nature simultaneously admired and excused, they all strive to be rich. Why? Did you ever ask yourself? For power, of course, but especially because wealth shields from immediate judgment, takes you out of the subway crowd to enclose you in a chromium-plated automobile, isolates you in huge protected lawns, Pullmans, first-class cabins. Wealth, cher ami, is not quite acquittal, but reprieve, and that's always worth taking. Above all, don't believe your friends when they ask you to be sincere with them. They merely hope you will encourage them in the good opinion they have of themselves by providing them with the additional assurance they will find in your promise of sincerity. How could sincerity be a condition of friendship? A liking for truth at any cost is a passion that spares nothing and that nothing resists. It's a vice, at times a comfort or a selfishness. Therefore, if you are in that situation, don't hesitate. Promise to tell the truth and then lie as best you can. You will satisfy their hidden desire and doubly prove your affection. This is so true that we rarely confide in those who are better than we. Rather, we are more inclined to flee their society. Most often, on the other hand, we confess to those who are like us and who share our weaknesses. Hence, we don't want to improve ourselves or be bettered, for we should first have to be judged in default. We merely wish to be pitied and encouraged in the course we have chosen. In short, we should like at the same time to cease being guilty, and yet not make the effort of cleansing ourselves. Not enough cynicism and not enough virtue. We lack the energy of evil as well as the energy of good. Do you know Dante? Really? The devil, you say? Then you know that Dante accepts the idea of neutral angels and the quarrel between God and Satan, and he puts them in limbo, a sort of vestibule of his hell. We are in the vestibule, cher ami. Patience? You're probably right. It would take patience to wait for the last judgment. But that's it. We're in a hurry, so much in a hurry indeed that I was obliged to make myself a judge penitent. However, I first had to make shift with my discoveries and put myself right with my contemporaries' laughter. From the evening when I was called, for I was really called, I had to answer, or at least seek an answer. It wasn't easy. For some time I floundered. To begin with, that perpetual laugh and the laughters had to teach me to see clearly within me and to discover at last that I was not simple. Don't smile. That truth is not so basic as it seems. What we call basic truths are simply the ones we discover after all the others. However that may be, after prolonged research on myself, I brought out the fundamental duplicity of the human being. Then I realized, as a result of delving into my memory, that modesty helped me to shine, humility to conquer, and virtue to oppress. I used to wage war by peaceful means, and eventually used to achieve through disinterested means everything I desired. For instance, I never complained that my birthday was overlooked. People were even surprised with a touch of admiration by my discretion on this subject. But the reason for my disinterestedness was even more discreet. I longed to be forgotten in order to be able to complain to myself. Several days before the famous date, which I knew very well, I was on the alert. eager to let nothing slip that might arouse the attention and memory of those on whose laps I was counting. Didn't I once go so far as to contemplate falsifying a friend's calendar? Once my solitude was thoroughly proved, I could surrender to the charms of a virile self-pity. Thus the surface of all my virtues had a less imposing reverse side. It is true that in another sense my shortcomings turned to my advantage. For example, the obligation I felt to conceal the vicious part of my life gave me a cold look that was confused with the look of virtue. My indifference made me loved. My selfishness wound up in my generosities. I stopped there, for too great a symmetry would upset my argument. But after all, I presented a harsh exterior and yet could never resist the offer of a glass or of a woman. I was considered active, energetic, and my kingdom was the bed. I used to advertise my loyalty. I don't believe there was a single person I loved that I didn't eventually betray. Of course, my betrayals didn't stand in the way of my fidelity. I used to knock off a considerable pile of work through successive periods of idleness, and I had never ceased aiding my neighbor thanks to my enjoyment in doing so. But however much I repeated such facts to myself, they gave me but superficial consolations. Certain mornings I would get up the case against myself most thoroughly, coming to the conclusion that I excelled above all in scorn. The very people I helped most often were the most scorned. Courteously, with a solidarity charged with emotion, I used to split daily in the face of all the blind. Courteously, with a solidarity charged with emotion, I used to spit daily in the face of all the blind. Tell me frankly, is there any excuse for that? There is one, but so wretched that I cannot dream of advancing it. In any case, here it is. I have never been really able to believe that human affairs were serious matters. I had no idea where the serious might lie, except that it was not in all this I saw around me which seemed to me merely an amusing game, or tiresome. There are really efforts and convictions I have never been able to understand. I always look with amazement and a certain suspicion on those strange creatures who died for money, fell into despair over the loss of a position, or sacrificed themselves with a high and mighty manner for the prosperity of their family. I could better understand that friend who had made up his mind to stop smoking and through sheer willpower had succeeded. One morning he opened the paper, read that the first H-bomb had been exploded, learned about its wonderful effects, and hastened to a tobacco shop. To be sure, I occasionally pretended to take life seriously, but very soon the frivolity of seriousness struck me and I merely went on playing my role as well as I could. I played at being efficient, intelligent, virtuous, civic-minded, shocked, indulgent, fellow-spirited, edifying. In short, there's no need of going on. You have already grasped that I was like my Dutchmen who are here without being here. I was absent at the moment when I took up the most space. I have never been really sincere and enthusiastic except when I used to indulge in sports, and in the army when I used to act in plays we put on for our own amusement. In both cases there was a rule of the game which was not serious but which we enjoyed taking as if it were. Even now, the Sunday matches in an overflowing stadium and the theater, which I loved with the greatest passion, are the only places in the world where I feel innocent. But who would consider such an attitude legitimate in the face of love, death, and the wages of the poor? Yet what can be done about it? I could imagine the love of Isolde only in novels or on the stage. At times, people on their deathbed seemed to me convinced of their roles. The lines spoken by my poor clients always struck me as fitting the same pattern. Whence, living among men without sharing their interests, I could not manage to believe in the commitments I made. I was courteous and indolent enough to live up to what was expected of me in my profession, my family, or my civic life, but each time with a sort of indifference that spoiled everything. I lived my whole life under a double code, and my most serious acts were often the ones in which I was the least involved. Wasn't that after all the reason that added to my blunders I could not forgive myself, that made me revolt most violently against the judgment I felt forming in me and around me, and that forced me to seek an escape? Wasn't that after all the reason that added to my blunders I could not forgive myself, that made me revolt most violently against the judgment I felt forming in me and around me, and that forced me to seek an escape? For some time my life continued outwardly as if nothing had changed. I was on rails and speeding ahead, as if purposely people's praises increased. And that's just where the trouble came from. You remember the remark, "Woe to you when all men speak well of you"? Ah, the one who said that spoke words of wisdom. Woe to me. Consequently, the engine began to have whims, inexplicable breakdowns. Then it was that the thought of death burst into my daily life. I would measure the years separating me from my end. I would look for examples of men of my age who were already dead, and I was tormented by the thought that I might not have time to accomplish my task. What task? I had no idea. Frankly, Was what I was doing worth continuing? But that was not quite it. A ridiculous fear pursued me. In fact, one cannot die without having confessed all one's lies. Not to God or to one of his representatives. I was above that, as you well imagine. No, it was a matter of confessing to men, to a friend, to a beloved woman, for example. Otherwise, were there but one lie hidden in a life, death made it definitive. No one ever again would know the truth on this point, since the only one to know it was precisely the dead man sleeping on his secret. That absolute murder of a truth used to make me dizzy. Today, let me interject, it would cause me instead subtle joys. The idea, for instance, that I am the only one to know what everyone is looking for, and that I have at home an object which kept the police of three countries on the run, is a sheer delight. The idea, for instance, that I am the only one to know what everyone is looking for, and that I have at home an object which kept the police of three countries on the run, is a sheer delight. But let's not go into that. At the time, I had not yet found the recipe, and I was fretting. I pulled myself together, of course. What did one man's lie matter in the history of generations? And what pretension to want to drag out into the full light of truth a paltry fraud, lost in the sea of ages like a grain of sand in the ocean? I also told myself that the body's death, to judge from those I had seen, was in itself sufficient punishment that absolved all. Salvation was won, that is, the right to disappear definitively in the sweat of the death agony. Nonetheless, the discomfort grew. Death was faithful at my bedside. I used to get up with it every morning, and compliments became more and more unbearable to me. It seemed to me that the falsehood increased with them so inordinately that never again could I put myself right. A day came when I could bear it no longer. My first reaction was excessive. Since I was a liar, I would reveal this and hurl my duplicity in the face of all those imbeciles even before they discovered it. Provoked to truth, I would accept the challenge. In order to forestall the laughter, I dreamed of hurling myself into the general derision. In short, it was still a question of dodging judgment. I wanted to put the laughers on my side, or at least to put myself on their side. I contemplated, for instance, jostling the blind on the street, and from the secret, unexpected joy this gave me, I recognized how much a part of my soul loathed them. I planned to puncture the tires of invalids' vehicles. To go and shout lousy proletarian under the scaffoldings on which laborers were working, to slap infants in the subway. I dreamed of all that and did none of it. If I did something of the sort, I have forgotten it. In any case, the very word justice gave me strange fits of rage. I continued of necessity to use it in my speeches to the court, but I took my revenge by publicly inveighing against the humanitarian spirit. I announced the publication of a manifesto exposing the oppression that the oppressed inflict on decent people. One day, while I was eating lobster at a sidewalk restaurant, and a beggar bothered me, I called the proprietor to drive him away and loudly approved the words of that administrator of justice. "You are embarrassing people," he said. "Just put yourself in the place of these ladies and gents, after all." Finally, I used to express to whoever would listen my regret that it was no longer possible to act like a certain Russian landowner whose character I admired. He would have a beating administered both to his peasants who bowed to him and to those who didn't bow to him, in order to punish a boldness he considered equally impudent in both cases. However, I recall more serious excesses. I began to write an ode to the police, an apotheosis of the guillotine. However, I recall more serious excesses. I began to write an ode to the police and an apotheosis of the guillotine. Above all, I used to force myself to visit regularly the special cafes where our professional, humanitarian free-thinkers gathered. My good past record assured me of a welcome. There, without seeming to, I would let fly a forbidden expression. "Thank God," I would say, or more simply, "My God." You know what shy little children our cafe atheists are. A moment of amazement would follow that outrageous expression. They would look at one another dumbfounded. Then the tumult would burst forth. Some would flee the cafe, others would gabble indignantly without listening to anything, and all would writhe in convulsions like the devil in holy water. You must look on that as childish, yet maybe there was a more serious reason for those little jokes. I wanted to upset the game, and above all to destroy that flattering reputation, the thought of which threw me into a rage. "A man like you," people would say sweetly, and I would blanch. I didn't want their esteem because it wasn't general. How could it be general since I couldn't share it? Hence it was better to cover everything, judgment and esteem, with a cloak of ridicule. I had to liberate at all costs the feeling that was stifling me. In order to reveal to all eyes what he was made of, I wanted to break open the handsome wax figure I presented everywhere. For instance, I recall an informal lecture I had to give to a group of young fledgling lawyers. Irritated by the fantastic praises of the president of the bar who had introduced me, I couldn't resist long. I'd begun with the enthusiasm and emotion expected of me, which I had no trouble summoning up on order, but I suddenly began to advise alliance as a system of defense. Not, I said, that alliance perfected by modern inquisitions which judge simultaneously a thief and an honest man in order to crush the second under the crimes of the first. On the contrary, I meant to defend the thief by exposing the crimes of the honest man, the lawyer in this instance. I explained myself very clearly on this point. Let us suppose that I have accepted the defense of some touching citizen, a murderer through jealousy. Gentlemen of the jury, consider, I should say, how venile it is to get angry when one sees one's natural goodness put to the test by the malignity of their fair sex. By the malignity of the fair sex. It is not more serious, on the contrary, to be by chance on the side of the bar, on my own bench, without ever having been good or suffered from being duped. I am free, shielded from your severities, yet who am I? A Louis XIV in pride, a billy goat for lust, a Pharaoh for wrath, a king of laziness. I haven't killed anyone, not yet to be sure, but have I not let deserving creatures die? Maybe, and maybe I am ready to do so again. Whereas this man, just look at him, will not do so again. He is still quite amazed to have accomplished what he has. This speech rather upset my young colleagues. After a moment, they made up their minds to laugh at it. They became completely reassured when I got to my conclusion, in which I invoked the human individual and his supposed rights. That day, habit went out. By repeating these pleasant indiscretions, I merely succeeded in disconcerting opinion somewhat, not in disarming it, or above all, in disarming myself. The amazement I generally encountered in my listeners, the rather reticent embarrassment, someone like what you are showing. No, don't protest. Do not calm me at all. You see, it is not enough to accuse yourself in order to clear yourself. Otherwise, I'd be as innocent as a lamb. One must accuse oneself in a certain way, which it took me considerable time to perfect. I did not discover it until I fell into the most utterly forlorn state. Until then, the laughter continued to drift my way, without my random efforts succeeding in divesting it of its benevolent, almost tender quality that hurt me. But the sea is rising, it seems to me. It won't be long before our boat leaves. The day is ending. Look, the doves are gathering up there. They are crowding against one another, hardly stirring, and the light is waning. Don't you think we should be silent to enjoy this rather sinister moment? No? I interest you? You are very polite. Moreover, I now run the risk of really interesting you. Before explaining myself on the subject of judges penitent, I must talk to you of debauchery and of the little ease. I don't know what the fuck he's saying.